Shalom. So, after my discussion yesterday with Chezi Spiro, um, there were a lot of things bubbling in my mind as and Chezi and I, well, more me than Chezi, um, spoke a lot in Hebrew and Yiddish and about things that I think are important, um, yet not well known to the general audience. And as part of my discussion with Chazi, I kind of became convinced that really, to some extent, this is stuff that needs, I think, should be available to a wider audience. Um, and really, I mean, there's a note um, on Halakhic Man, which it's just been so seminal for the past 20 years since I read it, that I first typed it into my live journal. If you guys remember what live journal was, this is before Facebook. And then I transferred it into Facebook, and several times in this corner of the internet, many times actually, I've referred people to it. And I thought it was important to introduce it into the discussion. So one of the things that came up yesterday, and I think at least some people feel that it would be better if I didn't keep on pushing it, and I do keep on pushing it, is Torah Baal Shem Tov, Hasidism. The Hasidic movement started a little bit over 300 years ago, and it is a movement within Judaism. It is a movement that has grown to become identified by many people, especially people outside of Judaism, as Judaism. And frankly, I think it's right, because I think Torah Baal Shem Tov is right, that the students of the Baal Shem Tov and the Hasidic movement have had an important, lasting effect on Judaism, as controversial as it has been, and it has been very controversial, and still is. And there are, I would say, a majority of Jews are actually quite critical of Hasidism, and I'm quite critical of Hasidism, because it is a movement propelled by human beings who are very much human beings. Yet, it is a movement that I think is incredibly important, and I think it's from God. And so, when Hasidism started, when the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov started, the Jewish establishment at the time, who named themselves the Mitnagdim, or in more Ashkenazis, Misnagdim, which literally means those who oppose, opposed Hasidism. And eventually it became less than fashionable to admit your opposition to Hasidism within Orthodox Judaism because we had much bigger fights to fight. Although the fact is that I think Hisnagdus, that opposition to Hasidism is very much alive today. And as what's called Neo-Hasidism, which is the Hasidic movement kind of seeping out of the Orthodox community or into the more modern Orthodox community, because, I mean, it catches like fire. Every time I hear about a history of Hasidism, this analogy is made: souls on fire, right? That it catches like fire, and it has caught like fire, and it's beautiful, I think. But there are definitely people who are still very much opposed to Hasidism, and some of them will claim that there are only particular things in Hasidism that they are critical of. But I think what puts the lie to that is the fact that Yeshiva University, which is in many ways considered the hate to compare it to Mecca or Rome, but the epicenter of modern orthodoxy and to some extent dati leumi, religious nationalism, not religious Zionism, hired somebody who was completely, obviously incompetent for the position of being Dean of Judaic Studies, for the sole thing he is known for, which is his can't think of a better word than insane hatred and opposition to Chabad. That's what this man is known for. He is, if anything, a zealous persecutor of Chabad, and he was hired as the Dean of Judaic Studies at Yeshiva University, which he had no qualification for. He just didn't. That was the reason he was hired. So I think at least a few people would ask, why do I bother with the Hasidic Misnagdish divide? And frankly, I think my discussion with Chazi yesterday made that very clear. Now, the funny thing is that while Brisk and the Brisker method and the Soloveitchiks, like the Rav, are as misnagdish as misnagdish gets, right? Reb Chaim Volozhin was possibly the premier student of the Vilna Gaon, who was the leader of Orthodox Judaism when the Baal Shem Tov and his students came onto the scene. Famously refused to sign the cherem, the what's translated as ban or excommunication on Hasidism, because he said the Vilna Gaon signed it, you don't need my signature. But he refused to sign it. And Rabbi Joseph Ber Soloveitchik, J.B. Soloveitchik, sometimes Joseph Ber Soloveitchik is called. So he wrote Halakhic Man. He was the Rav. In English, when you say the Rav, it's clear you mean Rav Soloveitchik. And to some extent, even in Hebrew, I mean, when people talk about Harav, in context, you can often tell who they're talking about. And I think that's an incredible credit to who he was and what his legacy is still today. I should have looked up when he passed away. He passed away April 8th, 1993, at age 90. And curiously, the Rav and the Rebbe were both in Paris studying at the same time. And they had I think they learned together when he was a child. So part of Halakhic Man is an explanation of, because he comes from such a prominent dynasty, and it is one of the great rabbinic dynasties in Jewish history. Part of it is his recollections of growing up as a child and what his grandfather taught him. And he talks about how his father hired some Chabadnik to teach him Tanya because he wanted him to learn it from somebody serious about it. And I think there's something really important there. Unfortunately, I think Yeshiva University has become what I would call I don't have a better term for it, but academically incestuous. All the teachers are graduates of RIETS, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Theological Seminary, which is the seminary at Yeshiva University. And what used to be the case was that, and the Rebbe did this, he would send Chabad representatives of Chabad, some of the top students, to other yeshivas to learn from those people, to learn from the rabbis there, and in essence to be a sort of representative of Chabad in various yeshiva environments. This doesn't happen anymore, and it's very unfortunate. And I think, unfortunately, from what I have seen, and I might be wrong, but from what I have seen, Yeshiva University has in fact isolated itself far beyond what it should. They should be hiring faculty from other yeshivas, but obviously because of their secular studies requirements, which they want to say are incredibly important, even the great scholars in other centers of learning are not acceptable to them. And while I think Hasidism has certainly made a lot of inroads, it has unquestionably made inroads into the Misnagdish, the Litvish world. I think it makes sense. It is only right with 2020 hindsight to formally accept the fact that Hasidism has contributed something important which needs to be integrated into Judaism generally, right? When I talked to Chezi yesterday, a lot of the complaints he had, I think, stem from a lack of Hasidic rigor and Hasidic teaching in much of Orthodox Judaism. But I didn't just want this to be a criticism of the opponents, the Litvaks, because look, Halakhic Man was published in Hebrew in 1944, and I think, like I was talking to Chezi, when we look back at the capacity of our rabbis to see important developments in Jewish spiritual life, and if you want me to talk about the Holocaust, I will talk about the Holocaust. But we can talk about Zionism as well. But I think that's true, and with all the criticisms that would get, I think with 2020 hindsight, what a serious scholar of Jewish history sees is that we were guided by people who were guided by God and had a Ruach HaKodesh, right? Had the guidance of a Holy Spirit. When I first read this, I did not realize how applicable it would be to this corner of the internet. And I just have to say, a lot of people who like to claim the mantle of being students of the Rav, you're no students of the Rav. I'm sorry. Not going to get into acute halachic mental retardation, but there's a lot of what the Rav called acute halachic mental retardation, which dances around claiming to be some sort of manifestation of the Rav's teachings. And I actually think the resurgence of Hisnagdus, of an opposition to Hasidism, even if it a lot of it is under the guise of no, we only have particular things we dislike. No, I don't believe you. That's just how it is. So I'm going to read the introduction to Halakhic Man and then note 4 in the back, which I think is incredibly applicable to our our world and the meaning crisis in general, and the role of religion there. So, Halakhic Man, halakha means Jewish law. So, Halakhic Man reflects two opposing selves. Two disparate images are embodied within his soul and spirit. On the one hand, he is as far removed from homo religiosus as East is from West, and is identical in many respects to prosaic cognitive man. On the other hand, he is a man of God, possessor of an ontological approach that is devoted to God, and of a worldview saturated with the radiance of the divine presence. Now, homo religiosus, I actually tried to look this up more. It appears to have been much more fashionable back in the 40s and before that than it is now, but it apparently started with Cicero, and people use it to as a in opposition to Homo sapiens, or what here seems to be used as cognitive man, which is materialist, right? So Homo religiosus is the religious nature of human existence. For this reason, it is difficult to analyze Halakhic man's religious consciousness by applying the term and traits that descriptive psychology and modern philosophy of religions have used to characterize the religious personality. The image that Halakhic man presents is singular, even strange. He is of a type that is unfamiliar to students of religion. But if, in the light of modern philosophy, Homo religiosus in general has come to be regarded as an antithetical being, fraught with contradictions, who wrestles with his consciousness and struggles with the tribulations of the dualism of affirmation and negation, approbation and denigration, how much more so is this true of Halakhic man? In some respects, he is a homo religiosus. In other respects, a cognitive man. But taken as a whole, he is uniquely different from both of them. Halakhic man is an antinomic type for a dual reason. One, he bears within the deep recesses of his personality the soul of homo religiosus. That soul which, as was stated above, suffers from the pangs of self-contradiction and self-negation. 2. At the same time, Halakhic man's personality also embraces the soul of cognitive man, and this soul contradicts all of the desires and strivings of the religious soul. However, these opposing forces, which struggle together in the religious consciousness of Halakhic man, are not of a destructive or disjunctive nature. Halakhic man is not some illegitimate, unstable hybrid. On the contrary, out of the contradictions and antinomies, there emerges a radiant, holy personality whose soul has been purified in the furnace of struggle and opposition, and redeemed in the fires of the torments of spiritual disharmony, to a degree unmatched by the universal homo religiosus. The deep split of the soul prior to its being united may at times raise a man to a rank of perfection, which for sheer brilliance and beauty is unequaled by any level attained by the simple whole personality who has never been tried by the pangs of spiritual discord. In accordance with the suffering is the reward. Lafum Sara Agra, famous quote from the Mishnah Avot 5:23, chapter 5, Mishnah 23. and in accordance with the split, the union. This spiritual fusion that characterizes Halakhic Man is distinguished by its consummate splendor, for did not the split touch the very depths, the innermost core of his being? There is much truth to the fundamental contention set forth both by the dialectical philosophies of Heraclitus and Hegel with regard to the ongoing course of existence in general, and the views of Kierkegaard, Karl Barth, and Rudolf Otto with regard to the religious consciousness and its embodiment in the experience of homo religiosus. In particular, namely, that there is a creative power embedded with antithesis, and this is where note 4 is. We'll come back to it. Conflict enriches existence, the negation is constructive, and contradiction deepens and expands the ultimate destiny of both man and the world. Our aim in this essay is to penetrate deep into the structure of Halakhic Man's consciousness, and to determine the precise nature of this strange, singular being who reveals himself to the world from within his narrow, constricted 4 cubits. This is the Daled Amot, the 4 cubits of Halakha, which constrains a halachically observant person. Talmud Brachot 8a. His hands soiled by the gritty realia of practical halacha, see Brachot 4a. However, in order to fulfill the task we have set before us in this monograph, we must understand a comparative study of the fundamental and distinctive features of the ontological outlooks of homo religiosus and cognitive man. For only by gaining an insight into the differences and distinctions existing between these two outlooks will we be able to comprehend the nature of Halakhic Man, the master of Talmudic dialectics. I wish I could recommend Halakhic Man to a general audience. Unfortunately, it is so steeped in Judaism, I think it might be difficult, if not impossible, for somebody to read it from the outside. It is what it is. So, note 4. Even though Kierkegaard disagreed with Hegel's philosophy from beginning to end, and made it the object of his fierce, stinging attacks, he nevertheless accepted from him the dialectical principle, with many significant changes, to be sure. And this concept of the dialectic, which he and Karl Barth introduced into the analysis of the unfolding of the religious consciousness, and this view concerning the antinomic structure of religious experience. Antinomic here, he doesn't mean against the law, he means conflicted. I'm not sure antinomic is the best word to use, but that's what the translator did. The Rav often spoke in Yiddish, and his definitions, the words which he cared to emphasize, tended to be Hebrew words with resonance throughout Jewish theological literature. Where were we? And this concept of the dialectic, which he and Karl Barth introduced into the analysis of the unfolding of the religious consciousness, and this view concerning the antinomic structure of religious experience, which was revised and refined by Rudolf Otto in his book The Idea of the Holy, give the lie to the position that is prevalent nowadays in the religious circles, whether in Protestant groups or in American Reform and Conservative Judaism, that the religious experience is of a very simple nature. That is, devoid of the spiritual tortuousness present in the secular cultural consciousness, of psychic upheavals, and of the pangs and the torments that are inextricably connected with the development and refinement of man's spiritual personality. Basically, he's talking about moral, ethical, deist. What do people call it? Ethical deism, right? The pragmatic explanation. Too many people seem to identify with religion in general, and the use of religion, which I think is obviously wrong, and that's what he's explaining. This popular ideology contends that the religious experience is tranquil and neatly ordered, tender and delicate. It is an enchanted stream for embittered souls, and still waters for troubled spirits. The person who comes in from the field weary, Genesis 25:29, from the battlefield and campaigns of life, from the secular domain which is filled with doubts and fears, contradictions and refutations, clings to religion as does a baby to its mother, and finds in her lap a shelter for his head, the nest of his forsaken prayers. Quote from H.N. Bialik, Hachniseni tachat kenafech, bring me under your wing, in the feminine. And there is comforted for his disappointments and tribulations. Basically, religion is where you go when you're tired. This idea is partially embedded in the most ancient strata of Christianity, partially rooted in modern pragmatic philosophy, but mainly it stems from practical utilitarian considerations. The advocates of religion wish to exploit the rebellious impulse against knowledge, which surges from time to time in the soul of the man of culture, the yearning to be freed from the bonds of culture, that daughter of knowledge, which weighs heavy on man with its questions, doubts, and problems, and the desire to escape from the turbulence of life to a magical, still, and quiet island, and there to devote oneself to the ideal of naturalness and vitality. This Rousseauian ideology left its stamp on the entire Romantic movement, from the beginning of its growth until its final tragic, with an exclamation point, manifestations in the consciousness of contemporary man. Therefore, the representatives of religious communities are inclined to portray religion in a wealth of colors that dazzle the eye, as a poetic Arcadia, a realm of simplicity, wholeness, and tranquility. Most of the sermons of revivalists are divided in equal measure between depicting the terrors of hellfire and describing the utopian tranquility that religion can bestow upon man. And that which appears in the sermons of these preachers in a primitive, garbled form, at times interwoven with a childish naivete and superficial belief, is refined and purified in the furnace of popular philosophy and theology, and becomes transformed into a universal religious ideology which proclaims, if you wish to acquire tranquility without paying the price of spiritual agonies, turn on to religion. If you wish to achieve a fine psychic equilibrium without having to first undergo a slow, gradual personal development, turn on to religion. And if you wish to achieve an instant spiritual wholeness and simplicity that need not be forged out of the struggles and torments of consciousness, turn onto religion. Get thee out of thy country. He's quoting Lech Lecha, the first verse of the Parsha, regarding Abraham, right? God says to Abraham, Lech Lecha mi artzecha mi moladecha mi beit avicha, leave your leave your land, leave your birthplace, and leave the house of your fathers to go to the land where I shall show you, right? And he is giving a stingingly sarcastic interpretation of this. So, get thee out of thy country, which is filled with anxiety, anguish, and tension, and from thy birthplace, which is so frenzied, raging, and stormy, to the land that is enveloped by the stillness of peace and tranquility, to the Arcadia wherein religion reigns supreme. The leap from the secular world to the religious world could not be simpler and easier. There is no need for a process of transition with all its torments and upheavals. A person can acquire spiritual tranquility in a single moment. Typical of this attitude is the Christian Science movement, and I would say much of evangelicalism. The idea that, I accept Jesus, and suddenly, magically, my life is going to be perfect. Jesus, take the wheel. And this is where he destroys it. It would appear to me that there is no need to explain the self-evident falsity of this ideology. Except there obviously is a need. First, the entire romantic aspiration to escape from the domain of knowledge, the rebellion against the authority of objective scientific cognition, which has found its expression in the biologistic philosophies of Bergson, Nietzsche, Spengler, Klages. I don't know most of these names. Nietzsche. And their followers, and in the phenomenological, existential, and anti-scientific school of Heidegger and his coterie. And I would say this includes basically all of modern postmodernism, which didn't really exist yet when he wrote this, and from the midst of which there arose in various forms the sanctification of vitality and intuition, the veneration of instinct, the desire for power, the glorification of the emotional affective life, and the flowing, surging stream of subjectivity, the lavishing of extravagant praise as on the Faustian type, and the Dionysian personality, etc., etc., have brought complete chaos and human depravity to the world. He wrote this in 1944, and this translation is from 84, I believe. Could have written it today. Have brought complete chaos and human depravity to the world. And let the events of the present era be proof. I think he's mostly talking about communism and fascism, but now we have commu-fascism in the form of postmodern neo-Marxism, and here it is. The individual who frees himself from the rational principle and who casts off the yoke of objective thought will in the end turn destructive and lay waste the entire created order. Therefore, it is preferable that religion should ally itself with the forces of clear logical cognition, as uniquely exemplified in the scientific method. Even though at times the two might clash with one another, rather than pledge its troth to beclouded, mysterious ideologies that grope in the dark corners of existence, unaided by the shining light of objective knowledge, and believe that they have penetrated to the secret core of the world. I cannot express this and endorse this enough. I think, especially in our present situation, we have to realize that yes, we need religiosity and symbolism, but that religiosity and symbolism must be grounded in creation and the creator and the God of history, who does things, who makes a real world which is knowable and is there to teach us. And second, this ideology is intrinsically false and deceptive. That religious consciousness in man's experience, which is most profound and most elevated, which penetrates to the very depths and ascends to the very heights, is not that simple and comfortable. On the contrary, it is exceptionally complex, rigorous, and tortuous. Where you find its complexity, there you find its greatness. The religious experience from beginning to end is antinomic and antithetic. The consciousness of homo religiosus flings bitter accusations against itself, and immediately is filled with regret, judges its desires and yearnings with excessive severity, and at the same time steeps itself in them, casts derogatory aspersions on its own attributes, flails away at them, but also subjugates itself to them. It is in a condition of spiritual crisis, of psychic ascent and descent, of contradiction arising from affirmation and negation, self-abnegation and self-appreciation. The idea of temporality and eternity, knowledge and choice, necessity and freedom, love and fear, the yearning for God and the flight from his glorious splendor, incredible, overbold daring, and an extreme sense of humility, transcendence, and God's closeness. The profane and the holy, etc., etc., struggle within his religious consciousness, wrestle and grapple with each other. This one ascends and this descends, this falls and this rises. Religion is not, at the outset, a refuge of grace and mercy for the despondent and desperate, an enchanted stream for crushed spirits, but a raging, clamorous torrent of man's consciousness, with all its crises, pangs, and torments. Yes, it is true that during the third Shabbat meal at dusk, as the day of rest declines, and man's soul yearns for its Creator, and is afraid to depart from that realm of holiness, whose name is Sabbath, into the dark and frightening secular workaday week, we sing the psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters." Psalm 23. And Chezi brought this up yesterday. I think this is part of the Jewish experience that many people, including secular Jews, and especially people who are not Jewish, don't really understand. So Shabbat starts on Friday afternoon, and we start with Kabbalat Shabbat and a great meal, and the next day in the morning there is the main service, prayer service of the week generally, and then there's Kiddush, and then there is Seudah Shlishit, which is an actually incredibly sad time as the Sabbath leaves in I think the mind of truly religious people, because yes, all the restrictions are going to go away, and Motzei Shabbat, taking a hot shower, taking off your former clothing, Motzei Shabbat is when all the kids in Jerusalem go to the disco, and even some of the religious, which obviously shouldn't, and Malava Malka in the more religious sense, with real music and things like that, and you can, in a very real sense, do what a lot of things that you could not do on Shabbat. But in a very real sense, as Shabbat leaves, it's an incredibly sad time, like Chazi said, and like he's saying. And we believe with our entire hearts in the words of the psalmist. However, this psalm only describes the ultimate destination of homo religiosus, not the path leading to that destination. For the path that eventually will lead to the green pastures and to the still waters is not the royal road, but a narrow, twisting footway that threads its course along the steep mountain slope as the terrible abyss yawns at the traveler's feet. Many see the Lord passing by, and a great and strong wind rending mountains and shattering rocks, and after the wind an earthquake, and after the earthquake a fire. But only a few prove worthy of hearing the still small voice. 1 Kings 19:11 to 12. And that's I'm kind of amazed that Chazi, when I brought this note up, he brought up this the still small voice, called daka domema, I think the word is, fragile, silent voice. Out of the straits have I called, O Lord, Psalm 118:5. Out of the depths I have called unto thee, O Lord, Psalm 131. Out of the straits of inner opposition and incongruities, spiritual doubts and uncertainties, out of the depths of a psyche rent with antinomies and contradictions, out of the bottomless pit of a soul that struggles with its own torments, I have called unto thee, O Lord. And when the Torah testifies that Israel, in the end, would repent out of anguish and agony, cf. Maimonides' Laws of Repentance 7:5, in your distress, when all these things are come upon you, and you will return unto the Lord your God, Deuteronomy 4, verse 30. It had in mind not only physical pain, but also spiritual suffering. The pangs of searching and groping, the tortures of spiritual crises, and exhausting treks of the soul purify and sanctify man, cleanse his thoughts, and purge them of the husks of superficiality and the dross of vulgarity. Out of these torments there emerges a new understanding of the world, a powerful spiritual enthusiasm that shakes the very foundations of man's existence. He arises from the agonies purged and refined, possessed of a pure heart and new spirit. It is a time of agony unto Jacob, but out of it he be saved. Jeremy 30, verse 7. I.e., that is to say, from out of the very midst of the agony itself, he will attain eternal salvation and redemption. The spiritual stature and countenance of the man of God are chiseled and formed by the pangs of redemption themselves. I think it's absolutely amazing how well this speaks to our current day. I am going to end it there. Halakhic Man, certainly for the Jewish reader, it is considered one of the basic and defining works of modern Orthodoxy. But at the same time, I have to say, Um, I think we see from the life of the Rav and the Rebbe that I don't think there are a lot of students of the Rav. I think a lot of people, including myself, would like to think of ourselves as students of the Rav. Um, he he made many disciples because he taught a Torah that people still would like to claim as their own, and it was his. Hope you enjoyed this. If you have questions or anything like that, please feel free to put it into the comments. I usually hang around at the end of my live streams at least for a few minutes in case anybody has questions or anything like that. Otherwise, I bid you adieu.